Pretty much every day when I check my inbox, I have a company hitting me up if I want to do a Nintendo Switch controller review, and I pass on 99.9% of them because most of them are just junk. And I kind of got bored with that. If you go on Amazon.com right now and just type in Nintendo Switch controller, there's thousands of them. Copies of copies of copies. Some things look a little unique, some things look ridiculous. There's a lot of stuff to weed through, and I typically just stick to the Pro Controller from Nintendo. That's my go-to. But for some reason, this Elitist S controller, when the company hit me up on it, it looked interesting. I liked the functionality, and I decided, you know what, let's take a look at this thing. I'm going to be giving you guys my full-on opinion on this controller, as I have used it quite a bit. Now, it is multi-purpose, like a lot of controllers are. You could use this on a Windows PC, Android, iOS, the Nintendo Switch, obviously. Pretty much anything that you can connect a controller to via Bluetooth or USB, you're going to be able to use this for. It does have a 2.4 gigahertz dongle, wireless dongle, or you can go wired. Now, I did test this on my PC on Mister, had no issues using it, but with the functionality behind this controller, I wanted to focus more on the Nintendo Switch today. So a lot of people do look for reasonably priced Pro Controller alternatives out there. So after having used this controller quite a bit over the past week or so, I do have a few things I need to point out here. Now, as far as the actual functionality of the controller goes, the analog sticks, the buttons and everything, I haven't had any issues with that. Like no stick drift or buttons not performing properly, nothing like that. But obviously the feel of them may be what draws you to it or draws you away from it. And the analog stick, while very fluid and functions fine, like, I mean, I have no issues with the way the analog sticks react. They do feel the tension's a bit looser than what I'm used to on like a Pro Controller and even various other controllers. It is kind of a looser stick. That's what he said. Now, as far as the buttons go, these things, man, I don't know. A lot of companies, they're kind of mixed on the way they do these buttons, and I think a lot of times it's the membranes that are used. But these buttons here, they do have like a very chunky click to them. They're just chunky buttons. I have a hard time explaining this, but it's like you push down, and it's like kind of a delayed pop back up, like you're pushing out ice cubes out of a like silicone tray or something like that. Like they react fine, but that feel. It's like those popper things that kids are playing with nowadays. Those little, like, you pop the little balls and buttons and whatever. The hell are those things called? I don't know. Wasn't like fidget spinners popular for a while? Now you got like fidget bubble poppers. Like it's like that, dude. I don't know how to explain it, but the buttons, I don't really care for them too much. But they do work, so I mean, I just have to knock off a point for the way they feel. Now, as far as everything else goes, using the controller, the one thing that they advertise heavily is that it has like some kind of Gyrocon plus technology going on here. Essentially just 6-axis gyroscope. And the gyroscope works just fine, no issues. And I know the one thing people will ask. Many people ask on all my controller reviews that I've done in the past, does this controller wake up the Nintendo Switch? And yes, as long as you have synced it to the Switch via Bluetooth, it will wake your Nintendo Switch out of sleep mode with the home button just fine. So that's a plus. That's a plus. That's a good thing because not a lot of companies have figured that out for some strange reason, right? Now, I have a few other points I got to bring up here. Using amiibos, no, it doesn't have the technology built into it. That is unfortunate. Wish it would have been part of it. You know, people want to use their amiibos for various reasons, but you're not gonna with this controller, so a lot of people may have already said never mind, right? But that's something you have to be aware of. You cannot use amiibos. It does not have the NFC stuff going on with it. Now, I did test this controller very briefly using it wired with the Nintendo Switch, and I did notice if it's charging while you're using it and wired, the back does get a little hot. So that's, you know, I believe you could turn that off with the pairing button to have it not charge and just use it in wired mode, but not a lot of people will realize that, but you can turn that off. Definitely recommend if you buy this thing, read the manual that it comes with, but if you just run it in wired mode and you're trying to let it charge while you're using it, it gets a little warm back there, man. It definitely gets a little warm. So that's one thing to point out. I've never really had a controller that I use wired while it's actually charging at the same time that I'm using it wired gets this warm. Like, I mean, it is what it is. It wasn't like uncomfortable, but I just noticed it got warm. Now, other stuff you could do with this. We have turbo functionality. There is that little function button at the bottom, and that is used for plenty of things. Like, you could change around the sensitivity of the built-in rumble motors. You can change the turbo functionality, so you can use that, hold that, press the button you want to use as turbo, and it works as turbo. If you want to change the setting for turbo, you hold the function button, hit left on the D-pad, and that will cycle through like a small amount of turbo, a medium amount, and a high amount of turbo. They got your turbo covered here. Now, the cool thing, the one thing that I was attracted to this controller by, and it's not like the first time I've ever seen this, but it does have those back buttons. I'm sure you've seen it throughout the video here, especially in the beginning when I unboxed it. But we do have those back buttons. Now, those back buttons come in handy because they can be used for various things. You can assign a button to them. Now, the way you use this is with that function button as well, because the back buttons, they don't do jack until you assign something to them. You can either assign a single button, you can assign multiple buttons if you want. You can assign macros, like just full-on movements and button presses with the D-pad and the buttons. I like having macros for some reason. I rarely ever use them, but I like having controllers that I know I could use them if I want. Like, this can come in handy for various things. I'm obviously showing Street Fighter as an example of doing like a few moves. You string together some combos or something, get your controller set up for it. But you would hold the function button and one of the back buttons, the butt button, hold that for a few seconds, and the controller will vibrate and the light will turn orange. And then you do your series of button presses that you want, or just assign it to a single button, whatever you want to do. However you want it, you just hit one button. Now that's going to be that button. And once you're done assigning what you want to assign to that specific back button, you just hit that back button again, and it will save it, and you are good. I really like that. I think that back button, the way it feels in the hands, it's a very nice addition to this controller that I haven't seen too many Nintendo Switch controllers do. I've seen macros before, but not set up in the fashion that this one is in. Now, overall, I think this controller is fairly solid at the price point. I believe right now it's around the $40 price point. The buttons on the face, I don't like too much, but at the same time, I think the overall package here is a solid Player 2. Definitely a solid Player 2 controller. Like, there's no denying that. If you can't spring for a Pro controller and you just want to get something that has some additional features, maybe you could utilize it in specific games, but you want to use some, your official branded controller and just have a spare, this is definitely solid for that purpose. Not the greatest controller in the world, by no means the worst. I would give this, if I actually rated stuff out of a number scale, I would give this one a solid 7.5 out of 10. It's got some cool functionality. It feels good in the hands. And the few little nitpicks that I have may not bother you. There you go. Really appreciate y'all watching, hanging out with me on this one. I will catch you guys next time. Peace out. Bye-bye. And boom. Bye.